I used the software and it was terrible and it's horrible and it decreased all my bids and I'm losing market share. And there are other people like, I doubled and tripled my account and my costs went down and everything was great. It has more to do with the products in the market than it actually has to do with the rule-based system as to like if it's going to work well or not for you.
We all want artificial intelligence to work.
Yes.
We just don't think it's there quite yet. All these other software solutions can only make decisions based off of what's in the data. And anybody who's a good manager will know that there are variables outside of the data that need to be incorporated in your changes. I've probably talked with like 10 or 15 different platforms being like, I'll send them my bid formula and say, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
Can I do this? And it's always like, no, but let us tell you why our solution has gotten good reviews from customers. Well, it doesn't work for me.
Hello everyone and welcome back. Today I am with Stephen Noch from Ocean PPC. Super excited. We've connected a lot over a lot of different things, definitely a lot of high level things when it comes to Amazon advertising. Today we're going to be talking about automations with Amazon advertising. I know both Stephen and I get a lot of questions on what's the best ad automation platform? Is AI any good? When should you use it? What are the pros and cons? I'm sure we're going to get into all of that today. So Stephen, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Elizabeth. I forgot how I even got introduced to you. Probably just saw you trending on LinkedIn and stuff. And some of the things you were saying, I was like, finally, I feel like a lot of my opinions are in the minority, and here's someone who agrees with me. So maybe it's a good thing we're on a similar page on a few topics, or maybe it's bad. Maybe it's just me looking for positive feedback on my own thinking processes.
I hear the same thing. I'll like throw out an idea. I'm like, I look at this way, and it's always nice to get feedback from others. Like, oh yeah, that's how I'm like, okay, I'm not the weird one. I'm not the one who got some interesting opinion that doesn't make sense to anybody else. So yeah, same.
Yeah, I think you and I both feel pretty firmly around doing a lot of processes manually, like bid automation or bid calculations and even budgets. So I'm curious just to hear what's kind of been your MO for managing bids and budgets. And I know we've also talked a bit about scripting and getting some VBA, macro Excel experts to help out. So, I mean, enlighten me. We talked a little bit about it, but I need a refresher on where you've been.
Yeah, let's talk about what we do, and then we'll probably talk about why and kind of what we're seeing in the space as far as automation options go. I definitely started out like everyone doing things manually, and then thought there must be a better way to do this, because at some point I'll say this often in conversations or maybe on podcasts, and I get the inevitable like grin and nod. I think on some level you can almost make the best decisions doing it manually, but what I find is that given large enough accounts, eventually your brain processing power shuts down. So by about the 5th campaign, you're no longer making the best decision possible, because just it's so much effort and just time suck to have to go through and do that. So I think all of us kind of came from that, realized there has to be a better way to do this, and then tried to figure out some sort of method. And then for us, and I know you also, which I think is one of the reasons we connected, is going about doing some bid optimizations layered with bulk files is kind of what we currently use. Now, of course, because those are spreadsheet based, you can inevitably layer pretty much almost a software on top of those in a way, kind of in some way. There's still some level of manual process that goes into it, but for us, it's kind of been the best of both worlds. You can do things at a very large scale while still having, for me, it's just the level of control that we can have. I wrote the bid algorithm myself. I know what it does. I know how I want it to do. I know all the things, all the inputs that I want it to have. And that's probably something we'll get into as far as the automation goes. Kind of maybe you and I struggled with it, but then also there are some definite, I would say, pros to automations as well that we probably can explore as well.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking earlier before we hit record, and we were saying how, there's kind of, I think, 3 ways to manage bids. You can do them manually, you can have rule-based automations, or you can have what's been trending, artificial intelligence. The only issue is, and you were saying, Elizabeth, that we all want artificial intelligence to work.
Yes.
We just don't think it's there quite yet. So we're not against it, but what I would really hope to see one day develop and because no one's building it, maybe I'll just have to build it myself. I don't know how expensive that would be to get developers, but I think what you and I have done is, we're downloading bulk sheets from Amazon and making all of our manipulations, using some macros in Excel to help speed that process up, and then just re-uploading those. What I would love to see, and I think why we like to do that is because we can control all the different variables. We have a better sense of the client goals that aren't necessarily in the data, and I think that's the biggest hinge for me, is that all these other software solutions can only make decisions based off of what's in the data. And anybody who's a good manager will know that there are variables outside of the data that need to be incorporated in your changes. Like, what is the overall sentiment of market? Have conversion rates been on like a decline because of, increased interest rates or inflation, whatever? Are you seeing trends that you want to get ahead of? Are you trying to ramp up for certain periods of seasonality? Are products going into low inventory? You want to pull back on them? And also, is the client stressed? Is there something particularly on top of mind for them? Are they primarily concerned around their margins, or are they primarily concerned around their top line revenue? Those are all variables that are not in the data that should be considered when making your bid changes. So for me, the perfect solution would be a web app tool, like a software thing, in which it's connected to the Amazon API. It's pulling in all your data, so you don't have to do bulk sheets and stuff, but you can create customizable bidding algorithms and incorporate like your own variables, like a kind of like a Build-A-Bear type thing.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen that solution yet. I've probably talked with like 10 or 15 different platforms being like, I'll send them my bid formula and say, this is what I want to do. Yeah. Can I do this? And it's always like, no, but let us tell you why our solution has gotten good reviews from customers. And I'm like, okay, well, it doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I think that's where we've come to similarly. Is in the beginning, I'll be honest, I started out using bulk files because software can be a very expensive solution, which if it cuts down on the time factor, it can be well worth, the cost investment. But just in the beginning, starting out again manually, kind of understanding what I want to do, and then kind of working that into what is now, today kind of our algorithm. And then when I eventually thought, okay, let me go out and explore software solutions, it's become so customized in what we do that like there is no plug and play software solution, which I think a lot of them can get close. That was one thing that we had talked about, again, before we hit record, as far as like the incremental rule-based bidding. And a lot of our custom, whatever it is that we're doing, it is all rule-based based on data. So in theory, it is possible to get a lot of what you want inside of a software solution. But one of the things that you touched on and that I've found with sort of any kind of plug and play rule solution is that the rules are always changing. And actually one of my and it could be that I haven't thoroughly explored all of the softwares out there, but one of my sort of frustrations that I found with a lot of the rule-based solutions is a lot of them you can get very incremental with being able to set certain parameters on even a keyword level, which is great. And that's something that we definitely have built into our systems. But what I find is that when you go and set all of these very customized rules and rules that should be, like you were saying, changing all the time, depending on kind of how the market is changing. Because one thing that, we factor in, I'm sure you factor it in, is the conversion rates. If the conversion rates change, that's definitely going to affect, ACoS, which is going to affect, even if you're just going off of ACoS, or if you have conversion rates built in, like a revenue per click model, that's going to factor in conversion rates. But just because conversion rates are changing doesn't always mean you need to drastically pull back. For instance, like you were saying, what is the client focused on? If the client is heavily focused on revenue growth, if you pull back significantly because all of a sudden the competitor dropped their price for a week because they're trying to get a bestseller badge and that affects your conversion rates, do you necessarily want to significantly pull back and lose momentum you've gained if goals are sales growth? So having some way where you can have influence into the system based on whatever it is that you're trying to achieve for the client. What I find is that a lot of rule-based systems, you can set them very incrementally, which is phenomenal. I have yet to run across an interface that allows me to quickly visualize where I have my incremental rules set up. They're like set up in this random campaign down here, or I have to go through and trying to figure out, you might be managing something at a campaign level and forget, oh crap, I actually set rules on a keyword level, and that's why this one keyword isn't being adjusted how I want it to because I went and reset it, but I'm not served up and there's no way for me to really visualize and go in and tweak different parameters quickly and efficiently. So I think that's been what we've found is it's kind of the hardest thing when it comes to automations.
Also, Elizabeth, I think, how many LinkedIn followers do you have?
Quite a few. It's somewhere around the 25,000 mark at this point.
Yeah. I only have 2,000, so anyone listening to this, please follow me on LinkedIn to
We'll drop the link in the
my
comments.
self-esteem.
Go follow
Yeah.
Stephen. He's smart.
However, I ran a poll on LinkedIn, and my polls never get as much responses as yours. So I would actually love for you to run the same poll I did just to get more.
Oh, I should.
More audience
I need content
feedback.
for tomorrow anyways.
Okay, post this one tomorrow. Although I don't know, Saturday? You're going to post on Saturday?
Saturday gets decent
Does it?
traction. It does, surprisingly. Okay. Fridays are garbage. Okay. Saturdays are pretty good.
Do you ever use the repost feature, like the retweet?
I didn't know that was an option. I do recycle content.
So here was the poll that I did. I said, how do you adjust your keyword bids? And there were 3 options. There was, number 1 was, I don't know, a third party does it, like automation, some other know, AI or whatever. The second one was increase or decrease by X%. And then the third one was the revenue per click model. And then I did leave a 4th option for like other, but not many people clicked that. Which one do you think received the most votes? It only got 21 votes. It wasn't that popular.
My guess would either be somebody else does it or the rule-based.
Yeah, it was the rule-based. And however, I think there was some confusion. I think some people, it is third-party automation, but it's also rule-based. So it's kind of like a blend of the two. But yeah, it was 57% of the votes. So more than half of the people were saying increase or decrease by X%. Only 30% said the revenue per click model. And then 10% said I don't know. But when you're doing your bid adjustments, are you going off of increase, decrease by X%, the revenue per click, a combo?
It's a combo. Kind of how our bid strategy has evolved over time. And we can probably get into this because I'm sure the listeners are going to be like, okay, great, you're telling me rule automations don't work and nothing works. So maybe we'll get into like how they actually can work and how they can be good. But what I've done, and again, this is through doing things manually. So someone else had messaged me. We were on a Q&A and they said, hey, what's the best rule automation or what software should we use? And my answer was, hey, if you don't understand the nuances or how bids affect your ads, you really should try doing it manually. Even if you have like 2 campaigns you're going to manage manually, just to see the relation and see how bids really affect things. Because my personal opinion, bids and keyword targeting are the 2 things that you absolutely must get right. If you can get those 2 things right, you can get a lot of other stuff really, really wrong and still run really efficient ads. It started out manually, so I would like adjust, maybe based on a specific rule-based set, and it would be like, okay, lower by X amount of cents or something, and I would do that for a little. I'm like, well, this isn't lowering it as quickly as I want to because of this specific scenario. Or I would go in and maybe lower it, do the same thing, and realize like, well, in this scenario, I actually want to be more aggressive because this, and this. So what we do is it's a hybrid depending on how slow, how aggressively we're going to adjust the target. That's kind of our factor. And then depending on the impact on the sales volume and how loose or tight the targeting is with like the certain match types. So broad categories, autos are going to get treated a little bit differently than say exact match, maybe phrase match, exact targeting, ASINs. So depending on, we kind of put in those 2 factors, and then also how quickly something is losing out. So if we have a significant amount of clicks and no sales, that one's going to get, decreased a lot more significantly than if we have, say, a couple clicks and no sales. And those are kind of like our basic inputs we use, which you can see why when I'm saying like rule-based automation, like if it is X amount of match type and these parameters with these orders, do this incrementally. That's our basic rule set. So I would say it's probably more lower by X% than it is a revenue per click model. That being said, the percentage is a variable percentage. It's not like a fixed rate.
Yeah, I think part of why, and I also do a combo, but where I think the revenue per click model comes in, which does your audience know what we mean by that?
We probably should define it.
definition.
Probably should have defined it.
So revenue per click, so I'll define it and as I explain why I like it. The increase decrease by X% means, hey, if this, let's say your target ACOS is 30% and this certain keyword has an ACOS of 40% or whatever, or if it's like above the target, it'll decrease it by a certain percentage to decrease your bid by, I guess dropping from 40 to 30 would be like a 25% decrease. So it would reduce the bid by 25%. The reason why I like the revenue per click model, because what it does is, number one, with that decrease the bid by X%, that's not factoring in your CPC, which is different from your bid, right? Your bid and your CPC aren't necessarily the same, because you might have been bidding $10 on that. Let's just speak in hyperboles to make the point clear. You might have been bidding $10 on that, but your CPC was only 50 cents because you were the highest bidder and, second price auction. So if you decrease your bid by 25%, you're now bidding $7.50 and your CPC isn't going to move at all. So decreasing your bid there isn't really going to help out in your situation. What the revenue per click model does, it basically just says, hey, if your target ACOS is 30%, that means for every $3 we spend, we should be making $10 in revenue. We're just going to try to figure that out on a click by click basis. So if your revenue per click is, let's just say $10, which would be extremely high, then your cost per click should be $3. Or maybe to put another way, if your revenue per click is $1, your cost per click should be 30 cents. And so it's figuring it out on a click-by-click basis what your CPC should be. And then from there, you set your bid to, you would perhaps put it at 30 cents. Your bid at 30 cents if you're targeting that 30 cent CPC. However, you also have to factor in, because again, what you're bidding isn't always the same as your CPC. If you have a dynamic up and down turned on, if you have increased bids for top of search placements or product page placements, you have to factor those in all as well, those are all things that I've put into our Excel macros to factor in, of all the data on this keyword, what percentage of those clicks came from top of search, and then what is our increase for top of search, and blah, blah, blah. And then we factor that in so you have your actual bid, and then you have a little multiplier to account for all the other variables. And those are things that I think are all important to include, which unfortunately, when you're looking at a different system, like an automation system, and it's saying it's artificial intelligence, I don't know if they've went through that whole thought process. I don't know if they've not only accounted for the increase for top of search, but also accounted for what percent of my clicks are coming from top of search. Because, if you have 100% increase for top of search, but 0 clicks came from top of search on that keyword, then you don't want to factor in that top of search placement when you're calculating your bids, because it's a very complicated process. But, but the point is, these are all things that need to be included, and I personally don't feel very comfortable with just handing over the controls to, I don't even know who designed this. Was this person even, how much media buying did they actually do? What types of budgets have they handled? Or is this something where it was just some CEO just talking to his developers and talking about best practices and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think the problem with artificial intelligence bid adjustments, because now we're going off of rule-based systems onto that, there's 2 issues I see. One is that there are certain things that you can't hold data for. For instance, like the API or the search query performance report, trying to determine what keywords should we be going aggressively after, because we can infer that we're going to get better placements if we go after these more aggressively. It can't, because search query data is not available in the API at this moment. Not all of them will take into account stock. It really depends on how well the AI model has been trained. What kind of data has it been trained on? What kind of data has it been trained to factor in? And like you were saying, the comfortability of the client going slightly more aggressive versus not as aggressive, or if things change, how slow or fast should we be moving based on our comfortability levels, based on our targets, based on our goals for spend or the end of the year account or year-over-year growth, or all these other things that we're factoring in. Those things, one, they're not available from an API. You just have to have conversations and good communication and understand nuance of language and clarify with the client. And then 2, there's not always a way to manually input those things into whatever the software is. For those reasons, and then I guess I would say a caveat to a third is, with a rule-based system, if something goes wrong, meaning it makes a poor decision or it makes a decision that you wouldn't have factored in, what you can do is you can kind of retrace. Okay, what was triggered with this rule-based system? What was the logic that was applied? How can I correct for that logic? So for instance, if you've maybe put a rule-based system in place that if something is not getting any impressions, I want to increase the bids. And maybe you've started increasing them. Maybe you did something very small, like 5 cents. And then you realize you go in one day and you see a whole bunch of bids, $20 $20. And you go, oh my gosh, what happened? You realize in that rule-based system, you didn't put like a fail-safe. I never want to scale bids past X. You go, oh, okay, so that's what happened. This is what triggered. Here's the fail-safe I can put in place, and here's how I can account for that. With AI, it's really interesting. Like the learning models are not linear, meaning they don't follow a direct path. They make a lot of different correlations, which means that it can make more sophisticated decisions, but it's much harder to trace the logic of those decisions back to why did this happen? What should we like retrain the AI model on? And you're just trusting that whatever developer or whatever process. Now there's some really smart people I know in that working on AI models that I trust them. I trust that they're doing the best that they can with those AI models, but for the reason that, again, there's no API, there's no way to pull that kind of information into the system that I would like to factor in. So for that reason, we haven't like gone on to AI models. I mean, both you and I said at the beginning, like, we would love for AI to work. If we both saw a software where we could put it on a client account, it's going to factor in everything, and we consistently hit every single target, and all of the decisions that are made with that system are ones that we would have made ourselves, 100%. We would all be using that. But I think what we found is that it's kind of a bits and pieces. There's oftentimes in software, I like this, I don't like this, I would prefer to manage like this, I would prefer to this happen in this scenario and this one in this scenario. And I think that just also goes back to, are you comfortable doing it yourself? Do you understand how the system works? Or if you don't understand how the system works, you could be just trying to plug in something, which what I've seen when people are just trying to outsource the brain power to something, being a software, they'll plug it in, and in some accounts it works really, really well. And then in some accounts it doesn't work really well. That's why you'll see people who say like, I used the software and it was terrible and it's horrible and it decreased all my bids and I'm like losing market share and it's terrible. And there are other people like, I doubled and tripled my account and my costs went down and everything was great. It has more to do with the products in the market than it actually has to do with the rule-based system as to like if it's going to work well or not for you.
Yeah, and there's a ton of positive feedback, positive reviews on a lot of these systems. But what you don't know is that, and I'm not trying to speak negatively of anything, but I'm just trying to let your listeners know, here are all the things we need to, consider. But perhaps sometimes maybe someone will go in, they'll have like 100 or 200% ACOS, and they'll flip on some automation, and finally their ACOS is down to like 30 or 40%, and they're stoked. That's great for them. However, that doesn't mean that if they were trying to manage their own ads before and they just had no idea how to manage bids, and because if you are a business owner, who really has time to practice and dial in bidding things where people like you and I, that's all we do is, glazing over spreadsheets and trying to maximize performance. So, after several years of doing that, we have a pretty firm conviction around how best to optimize. Yeah, if you were previously kind of trying to manage things your own and had no idea how PPC works and you had 200% ACOS and you flipped on some automation and it brought it down, that's great. I'm sure you'll be stoked. But I think what we're kind of more talking about are in these, especially as the space becomes more competitive, if all your competitors are using these rule-based automations or AI and they're not making more strategic decisions that would require managerial kind of input, then that is a huge opportunity for you to squeak out ahead of the competition. If a little bit of managerial input can even just get you 10% better performance, even just 10%, that 10% margin can be make it or break it for a lot of Amazon businesses, right? That 10% can be the difference between being profitable and going broke. It can be a pretty drastic difference if you're able to get just that little extra boost of performance.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. And for those people listening who are saying, okay, great, you're telling me like I can get good performance, but it's not going to be as incremental as I need it to be. Like, how do I even approach this at all? I would say the one thing that I've discovered with any sort of bid automation software is that what is it factoring in to make the decision, and how much influence do I have over how slow or how fast I need to make these optimizations. Those are the things that I've really found. So for instance, how I said that we factor in what kind of match type it is, how broad or how loose is the targeting, or how specific is the targeting on this one thing that we're going to increase bids or decrease bids for. What we found is that, say with broader match types, the potential search terms that can be triggered through those match types, there's a lot more of them. So there's a lot higher potential for things to go wrong. So what we found is that if you significantly scale bids on things that have just a high potential for something to all of a sudden stop working, that can create long-term issues for us. Versus if we have more control over the targeting, we can be pretty certain as to where our ad spend is going. And to be honest, when it comes to, say, increasing sales, I had a consultation conversation today. Someone was trying to focus on sales growth, and they were saying, well, my current agency is not getting me where I need to be, and so they're exploring options. And I kind of laughed and I said, well, honestly, I could go in tomorrow and absolutely double your sales. I'll just double bids on everything. That's kind of how it works. Or I hear all the time, cost per clicks are rising, and how do I compete in the market? To be honest, the way you compete and grow sales is increase bids, increase visibility, increase traffic to the listing, you increase sales. It's a matter of inputs on the top of the funnel, and then your conversion rate determines how many come out of the bottom of the funnel. So that's not the question. The question is, how do I do that? Because when I say that, everyone's like, oh, okay, great, but that's not helpful because I'm trying to make profit here. The question is, where should I increase bids? Where should I increase budget? And how slow or how fast should I be doing this to maintain some sort of profit? Because everyone always hears we got to test it, we got to figure out what works, which is true, but how slow or fast should I be moving on that? And then bids, you were saying, is what I consider one of the main levers, if not the main lever, to really start making those changes. And so I think that's why both you and I are so bullish on it, is hey, if you get this one thing right, so many other things can be going wrong in the account or not be that great, and you can still, don't get me wrong, the product has to be good, people have to want to purchase it. Conversion rate, I would say, is probably the main thing, but as far as the ads go, bids are really what's going to make or break the account. So when it comes to how should you start thinking about automations, that's why I say maybe manually adjust a couple of campaigns to realize okay, so if I increase bids here, how slow or how fast can I decrease bids without, significantly hurting the sales volume that's coming from this keyword? Because how do you decrease ACoS? You decrease bids. But then again, the question of increasing sales, okay, so I just increase bids, but of course there's no profitability. Well, if I decrease my bids, I decrease my visibility, I decrease my traffic, I decrease my sales. So then what you're really trying to do with bids is figure out where is the optimum that I can still get sales, but I'm not paying so much that I'm running at a complete loss. And that's really what we're trying to figure out with every single bid adjustment is, okay, so it's a little bit too much here, let's dial it back. It's a little bit too little here, let's dial it up, see if we can get more. But like I said, if you swing the pendulum too quickly, oftentimes you can drop off visibility on search pages that have a significant impact for the product sale. I think what both of us are saying is where can you identify those things that almost insulate them from any major changes? And then everything else, if you're getting one or two sales over here, I can make major pendulum swings, and the significant impacts in my account is next to nothing. Versus if I'm going to have my main keyword that I'm trying to drive ranking on, if I significantly drop off that search page, the impact to my sales volume is significant. So if you are going to use some automations, I would highly recommend your account manager, figure out what are the things that are highly important to my growth and my maintaining my market share, and then be more strategic and more incremental with those adjustments. And then you can say the rest of the account, you know what, all these low bid broad matches, they're fine. Maybe we can make significant changes there. And then what you're hoping to do is even out the impact and then slowly make moves toward whatever it is goal, profitability, sales growth, etc.
Yeah. While you were talking, something you said gave me a really good idea for how I can actually improve some of these macros we've been working on. But I'll have to share those with you all.
Yeah, let's jam on it afterwards.
We can think through them together. However, there was something that I thought up of a couple months ago, which was essentially a solution for how do you optimize a bid for a keyword with one click and no sales. What do you do with that situation? Because who knows if the bid on that is too high or not, but you can have literally thousands of those that all add up. I came up with an idea because I had a client who was at around 15% ACoS, which was around their break even, but they needed, for the sake of showing some profitability to a potential acquisition company, they needed to pull that ACoS down to 10%. And they said, we don't want to lose any sales in the process. And so I was like, okay, well, obviously that's really difficult to do. But my thought was, let's optimize you don't just want to pause all those keywords with one click and no sales, because those could convert on the next click. You don't know. But that was like my first thought was, let's come up with a system where based on how many clicks on average it takes to earn a conversion, we'll create some thresholds for where we should start to reduce bids and pull in a bunch of averages and blah, blah, blah. And we created a way to figure out what should your bid range be for those types of keywords based on, the 90-day performance versus the last 30-day performance. Yeah, we just we put those in and did a pretty good job of getting down to 10% with very minimal sales loss. And that was just like a new revelation that I had, just like being in the situation, that I realized I can apply that actually to all my customer accounts and improve ACoS with, because all those keywords are ones that, at least for the date range, had no sales. But we can find a way to include which of those keywords that are similar do get sales, and you can kind of just combine them and do a ton of averages. Like, that's what I think AI should be doing. I just don't know if AI has done that. I'd be very surprised if it was that level of thought that whoever's designing the AI, because I think with the advent and all the hype and craze of ChatGPT, a lot of people have perhaps become overconfident in what AI can do, which ChatGPT, that's a large language model that has basically read the entire internet, so has a ton of data. These other AI models that we're talking about don't have that. They only have the data from like their client base, right? They don't have access to all Amazon account performances across everywhere. So if this one software, let's just say they have 200 clients or 500 clients, maybe even 1,000 clients, that's still a pretty small sample size that they're pulling from. And I don't know if they've necessarily thought about these conditions. How do we optimize bids with one click and no sales? They probably just think, increase the bids here in order to increase visibility, because this is a low visibility keyword, so we should be increasing that bid there. That's probably the end of the logic. Whereas what me and my partner were looking at was, okay, do we actually want to increase bids on this? Like, that was a 50-cent CPC, that one click. And even though it's not breaking the bank, if you have a ton of these 50-cent CPCs, they all add up, and pretty soon you're spending like $5,000 across the board. And again, we don't want to just pause them all, but like perhaps our exploring budget, which is basically waiting until these get enough spent to make a more informed decision. Maybe our research budget on these keywords should be lower, that we're only averaging like 20 to 30 cents until we see that they actually get a conversion.
Yeah. No, I would 100% agree with this, and for the sake of the listeners' time, we might wrap up with some of the things that we actually think automations are good for, because I do think there's actually two that come to the top of my mind that are distinct advantages when it comes to automation. But yeah, I would agree with you, and with the whole because I'm exploring ChatGPT as well, and what I've found is that it's only as good as the inputs. If you input a very generic question, or what's known as a prompt, you're going to get a very generic answer. The more context you can give it, the more specifics you can dictate that you want for the outcome to look like, the better you're going to have your results. So what we've talked about with, AI, and again, that's a very good point, is how much data does it have input? How many scenarios in these things have we seen? For instance, back when all of a sudden Amazon changed ship times when everything was going down with COVID and the warehouse stock and everything, all of a sudden performance overnight went terrible, because nobody can get, everything's showing 2 weeks out. That's a significant change that needs to be factored in how you're adjusting things. All of us in the ad community were scrambling to go overnight. Well, people who are on AI automations or any automations, most times they look over a longer date range, which in 99.9% of the situations, you absolutely should be looking at longer date ranges. You don't want to make decisions off yesterday's data. You need to factor in long-term performance. But there's always going to be those, outliers. Heaven hope that never happens again. But you're always going to have those outliers that you need to factor in now. We got to make changes now, because there's things that are happening in real time that if we just leave it up to some sort of automated solution, you're not going to catch those things. And then by the time those things are caught, it's going to be a whole lot of wasted ad spend. For me, I can see, maybe you can touch on maybe if there's anything you see beneficial in automations at all. But I would say, regardless if you're using automation or you're going to go about trying to build your own solution off of bulk files, or maybe you are a developer and you can develop something through the API, some sort of human input I can see is going to be needed pretty much perpetually. But for the next while, you're still going to want someone overlooking it, still factoring in some sort of manual inputs to determine, like most softwares, even if they are quite automated, like to the point I would say almost full automation, there's still some sort of input as to what's your budget, how aggressive you want to be, how much do you want to pull back. There always is going to be some sort of factor that needs to be adjusted based on, again, goals, what it is that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think my favorite, I mean, you named some really good examples, and actually I forgot about that whole COVID delayed shipping thing. You just brought up
I know, I probably have like
nightmarish
flashbacks.
Yeah, like I remember one of my clients, all their products were flagged as like non-essential, but their competitors were somehow essential. It made no sense.
Yeah,
and
a lot of scrambling.
Horrible time. But yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's a really good example when all your product shipping is delayed by 2 weeks. The last 30 days of data are irrelevant to when calculating your bids. You have to factor in, you have to respond quickly and figure out what the conversion rate drop is. I always like to point to January. I've almost never seen automation software calculate bids properly on January 1st. Because they're all looking at the last 30 days with, obviously inflated conversion rates, whereas you should be looking at last January and see, like, what does our conversion rate do then? But at the same time, an automation can't only make bids based off of adjustments based off last January, because, like, what if the catalog changed? What if your prices changed? What if you have deals, These are all external variables that need to be accounted for. But, I mean, for me, the only thing to answer the question of where do I use automation, my macros are a form of automation. They're automating processes in the spreadsheet. The only difference is there are user inputs. So I basically have, like, a bunch of tables. It's going to do a ton of math for me, and then I can go in there and adjust. I'll have a couple variables that I can adjust. And then I run the automation itself. But I do find automation helpful in budget management, particularly for clients with fixed budgets in which you cannot overspend by a certain amount. It's really nice to have those safety rails to have something that's managing daily budgets, because if you have 1,000 campaigns, to manage daily budgets on 1,000 campaigns is a nightmare.
Yeah.
That's the primary purpose, I think, for me so far, is with budgets. But with bids, I'm still a bit of a diehard manual until maybe we can work together, Elizabeth, and build the dream.
Maybe we'll come up with something
web
fun.
app. Yeah.
I would love to. To me, it's like headspace and time space. But yeah, the thing that I've found, I think there's two factors in some sort of automations. One is the analytics. Because what we find is, a lot of the what happened question. You're left, downloading a whole bunch of different date ranges, looking at different tables if you're trying to do it manually. Now, you can find some really interesting things if you're doing things manually. I actually want to put out a video. I have kind of like a process where I go through and look, and it's allowed me to like quickly pinpoint points of change. So, but if you're trying to answer like the what happened question, or what are my trends, and you want to factor in things like conversion rates, like you said, ship time, or star rating, what's my star rating over time. There are a lot of interesting tools, and we actually use some of them for like analytics and quick deep dives into a lot of different account data points. That for us has been very helpful. And then the other thing that I will say is a definite drawback to using bulk files is you are looking at a static date range. I will be fully transparent. It is what it is. Both you and I have kind of come to the pros and cons and thought, well, that's something I'm willing to give up versus, being able to control things as tightly as I'm able to. That being said, being able to factor in multiple date ranges is much quicker if you're pulling everything from the API and you can have specific tables. It's much easier to have more dynamic look back windows.
True. That is actually on my next to-do list as like an experiment, because right now I'll download, I can still pick the date range, so it's semi-dynamic, right? I can decide if I want to use the last 14 or 30 days. And then I download that, I attach that sheet to my macro-enabled Excel file, and I just run the macros. But I'm going to try to go back to my programmer and say, hey, next step, I'm going to download 14-day, 30-day, 60-day. And then on my macro-enabled Excel, I can adjust the weightings every time. So I can say how much weighting do I want to apply to the 14 versus the 30 versus the 60. And I can tweak that, because as I know, as we come in and out of seasons of periods of seasonality, we need to, the weighting should change too, because that's something else. Like these other systems that maybe do have time-weighted averages or whatever, I don't know what you'd call it, but these like different weightings for different time periods, those weightings shouldn't even be fixed, right? Going into certain seasons, coming out of certain seasons, those weightings should adjust based on how much traffic you're getting and all that stuff. So that's the next big step.
Well, definitely. We'll have to connect because those sound super fun. So yeah, I mean, in recap, I would say if you don't thoroughly understand bid adjustments, try and understand enough to be able to have some sort of very strategic or intentional way that you're setting up rules, be that something that you're going to create yourself in the weeds, or if you do intend to use automation, understand kind of the importance of different things and how to adjust in a way that's going to make sense for your goals and your growth. So Stephen, this has been amazing. I really appreciate you coming on. I would love for, before we go, if you can just quickly tell the audience where they can find you if they're interested in getting a hold of you.
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best place to find me. Just search for Stephen Noch on LinkedIn and you'll get there. And also, Elizabeth, if it's okay with you, just a quick plug. So as you know, I'm starting a podcast with a friend of mine who's also in the space. We're going to hopefully be having you on eventually, but hasn't even launched yet. We don't even have a name for it yet. But we're planning in the first 4 or 5 episodes to cover bidding, basically. So all of like the revenue per click stuff. So it's going to be very deep, very technical. We're kind of going through four different scenarios in which we would apply different formulas. So if you're interested, that would be, I think, a helpful resource if you are trying to take things a little more manually, but you just need some help with figuring out what formulas to actually do and what to include.
Oh, yeah, that's really cool. When you drop that, let me know, and I'll drop it in the comments. I'll drop the links.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.